This lecture, which I think is going to be exciting. Everybody who speaks thinks that their own lectures are most exciting, but I'm not an exclusion to that. So thanks for coming. I've heard that many people have come from all over the world, from the other countries, as I have, from US, all the way here to Dubai to attend and to speak in this conference. The aim of my lecture today is mainly to target the most recent research that has been done in the area of epigenetics. I have been practicing oncology and integrative oncology for the last 20 years, I would say. And in the last 10 years, specifically treating patients with cancer, we tried to use therapies that could target a specific genomics and genetic alterations that, as you have all heard, makes up most of the field of customized oncology treatments. And these treatments are targeting the epigenome. Obviously, it's much more sophisticated than a couple of hours of lecture that I have to be explored, but I'll try to summarize most of the information that I have tried in the past few years to target with my treatment. The first topic of my lecture is biological interventions to interfere endocrine machinery in cancer. Up to a few years ago, as oncologists, we really did not know what the role of endocrine machinery and interleukins and growth factors are in the cancer growth and metastases. I'm sure most of you have heard about hormones being involved in the cancer growth and development in certain types of cancer, but specifically talking about growth factors and how they can intervene with the tumor's tendency to spread was something that was mostly unknown. I also have to declare that I don't have any conflicts of interest for this lecture. I do run a couple of corporations that are involved with drug development and research, but the basic of the research is not completed. So the abstract here is basically biological interventions to interfere with microenvironmental seduction, I call, by tumor cells, a breakthrough strategy in clinical oncology to inhibit angiogenesis and metastasis. Most of the studies that we have done recently in the field of cancer has been not only focused on the tumor itself, but also focused on the terrain, or the interaction of the microenvironment with the tumor. This is an extremely exciting field because when the tumor grows in the laboratory, most of the drugs that we use are very effective. And when it comes to the human being, when you try to translate those success in the laboratory into the human, you see that there is very, very insignificant results. Most of the time these drugs fail. And the reason, as I have always explained to other physicians, is that the tumor manifests itself in the human body as a fetus. In other words, it grows and it basically starts to metastasize by the support of the microenvironment, by the support of the patient's body. Is important because most of the studies that we do in the laboratory on new drugs, we are trying to translate that into the human body, and we're trying to use the information in vitro and translate it to in vivo. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen most of the time. The drugs fail because we really do not have the strong mechanism of inhibition of this support that happens between the patient microenvironment and and the tumor. It's the same concept of pregnancy. When a mother is pregnant, the pregnant mother body supports and provides nutrients and all the roles of fibroblasts around the tumor, make it inaccessible of any sort of treatment to get into the tumor. And the same thing happens here. So what we started to think was that if we have a sort of understanding of the biology of the tumor, of why this happens, and we can find a mechanism of inhibition of this sort of support between the microenvironment and the tumor, we have much more better results as far as getting the drugs into the tumor and inhibition of that. Here it really involves the support of the stem cells. And so the bone marrow stem cells play a big role in induction of this sort of support that happens between the human body or microenvironment and the tumor. As I explained in the next slides, you see how these cancer stem cells play such a big role in inducing this sort of support, in induction of this microenvironment seduction, and also promoting the angiogenesis. So, all of you have heard about angiogenic blockers. So when we talk about, for example, Avastin, a drug that is been around for at least 10 years now, initially it was used for breast cancer, for example, and then the FDA pulled it out because of the major toxicity along with the drug. The initial thought was that when you inhibit the vascular endothelial growth factor, the angiogenesis stops. Well, that only happens, unfortunately, for a temporary fashion. And what happens is that immediately after blocking the VEGF by using drugs such as Avastin or other targeted drugs, the upstream feedback loops become activated and the production of VEGF increases. The other reason that blocking the VEGF does not really translate to inhibition of angiogenesis is that it's not really about how much VEGF we have, but it rather has to do with its affinity of binding to VEGF receptor. And again, going back to our discussion about microenvironment and its role in the interaction with the stem cells, I will go through this in more details, and you'll see that the affinity of the VEGF to attach to the VEGF receptor is pretty much related to production of matrix metalloproteinase. And this matrix metalloproteinase is related and produced by bone marrow stem cells. There are several studies that have been done in glioma. Many of them have been done by UCLA and City of Hope, and we'll go over some of those so you'll see how this works. But again, the VEGF2 receptor and the VEGF affinity of binding determines the angiogenesis, not the VEGF itself. So going back on the relation of the microenvironment. So we talk about protection of the tumor and the fact that bone marrow produces this sort of cells that are bone marrow derived cells, that's what we call them, or stem cells. And this process is completely controlled under influence of hypoxia-inducible factor 1. So when you look at intratumoral hypoxia and how much a tumor is hypoxic inside, that correlates with stimulation of the stem cells to come from the bone marrow to the microenvironment, produce these growth factors, and increase the tendency of the tumor to metastasize. As I have gone through this in details in this slide, you'll see that the mechanisms are known through the TGF-1, or transforming growth factor 1, interleukin 34, that are driven by hypoxia. So when I give examples to other oncologists and researchers in the field, I usually use cotton balls. Now, just for the sake of ease, I'll use some Kleenex so you'll see how that works. So if you imagine that this is a colony of the tumor, the cells that are gathered together and they form a spheroid. Some tumors have a higher tendency to produce these spheroids. For example, the tumors that are tougher to treat, for example, in the case of pancreatic cancer, you know that these colonies have a very high integrity in their spheroids. They're very dense, and they really mimic, just like I said, the fetus. And the tumor cells do this very intentionally, because by doing this, they produce this intratumoral hypoxia, because the blood vessels cannot get into the center of this tumor. And by doing that, they stimulate the production of the VEGF and the signaling molecules to produce new vasculogenesis around the tumor. Now, the production of VEGF, just like I said, is induced by intratumoral hypoxia, and that's via hypoxia-induced factor 1 or HIF. So far, we don't have any drugs that is commercially available that blocks this target. HIF drugs are under investigation, and none of them are commercially available. So now, in our clinic, we have found the treatment that actually goes after hypoxia-induced factor 1, and it destroys the architecture of the tumor, makes it flat in 2 layers, destroys its spheroid integrity, and so now it becomes accessible to any drugs you use. It cannot produce VEGF anymore because there is no hypoxia anymore. And therefore, we're very excited to share this information, especially to the scientists in the field and physicians who are interested across the world to know more about our treatment. Our treatment, as we go through the slides, I'll try to explain more, but it does this through epigenetic modification. By targeting the epigenome, several genes in the epigenome, it is able to do this. And by doing that, then you'll see that all these cascade of growth factors of transforming growth factor 1 and interleukin 34, as I explained, will break. And this does not happen, then the pathways of PI3K, for example, phosphoinositol 3 kinase that are dependent in this situation also blocks. As you also know, if you're treating patients with any PI3K inhibitors, they are very toxic, extremely toxic, and the benefits are very marginal in the clinic. And most of them are not even available outside the US. So we think that what we have is extremely exciting because of the fact that it targets the mother molecule, the mother substrate, the mother pathways, and therefore it can really inhibit the whole process. So we talked about that. The protocol that we use in our clinic is called MTET, or multi-targeted epigenetic therapy. As I said, there are several epigenetic targets that we have. By blocking those, it can change the HIF expression, and therefore it can change the expression of c-Met and inhibit the tumor cell invasion and migration. So the studies that we've done in vitro and cell culture, 3D-dimensional cell culture, ex vivo models, and in vivo models, they have all confirmed that our therapy is able to not only cause apoptosis, but also inhibit the invasion, migration, and tumor metastasis. The beautiful feature of this treatment is that it does not cause resistance, because every time that you block anything downstream of the VEGF, as I just explained to you, for example, in the case of using Avastin, you create these feedback loops, and therefore, clinically speaking, patients' overall survival does not change. Majority of the time, the studies that they have, for example, done to approve the drugs such as Avastin have only shown improving progression-free survival and not the overall survival. This is a very important slide. It shows the relationship between hypoxia and our therapy, multi-targeted epigenetic therapy, as I said. As you can see, the orange bars are the bars that we used the full protocol, and the red bars are the bars that did not have the exposure of multi-targeted therapy. And you can see that HIF-1 activity significantly dropped after using our treatment. So conclusion, we believe that tumor mesenchymal features and the EMT transition, the epidermal mesenchymal transition, is somehow dependent on activation of hypoxia-induced factor 1 and further seduction of the microenvironment, explaining the clinical findings in our case studies. So that concludes our first set of slides. And then as we go to different other topics, we'll try to explore the therapy in more details. I would entertain any questions if there's any. So, do you want me to continue? Right. So the second set of topics is going around the subject of targeted therapies and how we can actually use targeted therapies in a different format, and I'll explain how that means. I called it, all these, I came up with terminologies that I hope it makes sense. So I called it sequential, meaning that it has a sequence. And this word sequential targeted therapy is not something that I just came up with. If you look at the literature, sequential targeted therapies is being discussed and basically proved as far as its concept in a variety of scientific literature. If you recall, 10 years ago when we used to treat patients with targeted therapies, even with the few drugs that we had, we only knew that if a tumor is driven by a set of genomic alterations, and if we block those genomic alterations, we call it targeted therapy, then the tumor stops growing. Well, that concept was the root or the core of further science and further studies, because then we realized that it's not just one targeted pathway or targeted molecule, rather the cancer is heterogeneous. In other words, the cancer has especially some types of cancers such as lung cancer, bladder cancer, melanoma, breast cancer, many other types are very heterogeneous, meaning that we have a whole set of drivers that can appear at certain times depending on the selective pressure or selective advantage that they have. Then what we did was that after a few years, we tried to combine targeted therapies. So then we had 2 drugs that we used in combination, 3 drugs that we used in combination. Every time that we combined different drugs, we came up with more toxicity and not so much advantage as far as clinical outcome. So the scientists were really challenged by the fact that as much as we try to block more and more, we get less and less clinical benefit, rather just toxicity adds up. So I was thinking about this myself, and I said, well, what if instead of targeting the individual targets altogether, because we know that we combine these drugs, 2 drugs, 3 drugs, what if we do that in a sequence, meaning that we keep the door open for the tumor to grow on a specific drive instead of closing all the doors. I'll give you an example. For example, this room might have 3 different exits, and that's exactly what happens with cancer. It has different escape pathways. So instead of blocking or closing all the exit pathways at once, which is what we thought it's going to work and it didn't, what if we close the doors one after the other, but selectively and in a sequence manner? Well, obviously, if there is fire in this room, everybody's going to fly away through each door, right? And that's what happens with cancer. But if we close the first door, everybody in this room is going to go to the back door, right? Well, obviously, that's what cancer does. When you block one target, it's going to use the different paths that is open. And this is going to create a crowd of people trying to go out from the back door. Force the tumor to use that path. Well, guess what? If we know how to close the back door later, then we will trap the tumor as it tries to escape. So that was the concept of sequential targeted therapies that I used with therapeutic, and I called it iatrogenic activation of feedback loops in cancer, meaning that we create this sort of tumor driving load through one genomic pathway that we have drugs for it. So we have an actionable target that we keep it open and we close everything else. This concept pretty much was revealed to me by testing. So I had patients that they would have not responded to targeted therapies, they would have not responded to combination of targeted therapies, even when those targeted therapies were given on actionable targets. And then I started to test this, and I found miraculous results, very, very beautiful results, with significant improvement in survival, tumor shrinkage in just few days. Amazing results with this sort of concept. So we're going to go over this on how this multi-phase approach works. I guess I covered most of the background and also how I came up with this protocol, applying a sequential single targeted therapy with specific application of our understanding of such dynamic biology into the clinical practice. We explore the advantage of single inhibition to combination therapies and dual inhibition on key pathways, as well as a multi-step approach to use oncological addiction and oncogenic shock as a suicide plan for cancer. So if you are in the clinical practice of oncology, I'm sure you know the whole definition of oncogenic addiction. So when the tumor becomes addicted to one target or pathway, we call it oncogenic addiction. As it does that, it goes through genomic degeneration of the pathways that are not used. And why in the 21st century, as we are trying more and more to treat cancer and we get less and less results, has to do with the fact that I just explained tumor is heterogeneous. And every time that you force the tumor to, by blocking one pathway, it escapes through another one. So by using this sort of methodology, you create an oncogenic addiction in a tumor that was not addicted. And then you create an oncogenic shock by blocking that pathway and make the tumor go through genomic degeneration. In a funny way, I used to tell my students that, you know, when you're young, you may date different guys or different girls, and you're not so much in love with any of them. And if somebody pulls out of your network, you're like, I'll go out with somebody else, you know. But if you pull out everyone except one, or somehow this one becomes the favorite date of you, then you fall in love with that person. All you need to die is for that person to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go out with you anymore. Because what happens is that you cannot go back to the people that you used to date and say, can I come back with you? And that's exactly what we do. We keep that one person available, and then we pull out that one person. That's just a funny way of explaining this. So we conclude that sequential and dual inhibition can and has to be considered as perhaps the only meaningful way to checkmate the tumor and with minimum chance of tumor resistance, and recommend clinical studies to further generate hypotheses based on each actionable target. I have treated, as I said, many of these patients in different phases, and I can share with you some of those examples. Specifically, for example, this one was a 51-year-old made history of stage 2 melanoma that was diagnosed in 2004 after he had a little bump on his thumb. Further, after the surgery, he was fine until 2015 that he had right axillary metastasis recurrence. It was removed along with 28 nodes, 14 of them were positive for melanoma. This patient received Rigwear, and I noticed that Rigwear is doing an exhibition here in the conference, and it would be interesting to talk to them to see how their treatment compares to what they do. But any sort of immune therapy, Rigwear, one of them, there are so many these days, checkpoint inhibitors, tumor necrosis factor, blockers, receptor blockers, all these drugs that are coming out as far as immune therapies. The problem with immune therapies is that they don't target the cancer stem cells, and what we think is that the combination of our treatment or any sort of epigenetic treatments with immune therapy is extremely important. Otherwise, you would have some, again, selective advantage to some cell types, which caused in this situation, for example, this patient to have tumor growth after the Rigwear. And then we combined, or I should say, we switched the treatment to MTAT targeted epigenetic therapy, and we had this sort of sequential treatment that I just explained with you. We chose one pathway, we blocked the downstream, we created the feedback loops. After stimulation of the upper high string targets, we blocked them. As you know, trametinib is a drug that is used for BRAF positive melanoma, and this patient did not have BRAF positive mutation. But with what we did, as I explained to you, we created sort of an overexpression of the BRAF-MEK pathway, and then we blocked it with a mechanism. So, initially, circulating DNA was positive for NF1, which is basically a parallel pathway for KRAS. CTC was turned out to be positive for c-KIT prior to treatment. Every patient that I treat before treatment, I check their circulating tumor cells, and we do analysis on them. And so it's true for circulating DNA. This S100B was elevated at 120, normal is less than 96, and this came up to 430 after completion of phase 1. Just like I said, you block at the doors, and then tumor starts to grow, and then you block it. So that phase 1 completed with increased growth of the tumor, and then we blocked it with the targeted track. We started on IV epigenetic therapy. The labs, as you see, we look specifically on IGF-1 as a prognostic growth factor on all tumors in melanoma as well. It was 216 from 232. S100B initially went up to 430, then we dropped to 270. As we speak, I think the last one we checked was 50, normal being up to 96. So it's almost as somebody that does not have any cancer. His the scan was completely clean. He has been in remission almost a year as we speak without using immunotherapy. Standard of care in US is in this situation using Keytruda, but we did not do that. PET scan after PET scan, everything came up clean. Circulating DNA, as you can see, NF1 completely became non-detectable. So the first set was 0.7, it came down to non-detectable. This is circulatory tumor cell. Before we started him on the treatment, the c-KIT was positive, and also tyrosinase and MART1, which are specific for melanoma circulatory tumor cells, were positive. And then post-treatment, they became all negative, c-KIT negative, tyrosinase and MART1 negative. And the reason that I'm persisting on the information on liquid biopsies, especially circulatory tumor cells, is that on my first set of talks, I just explained that why it's important to look at circulatory tumor cells and angiogenesis, because if a treatment is supposed to improve patient survival, it has to block angiogenesis. Otherwise, shrinking the tumor, just looking at the RECIST criteria, is not going to translate to better overall survival. And on my first set of talks, I just explained why epigenetic therapies are important in that sense, because by doing that sort of blockage of hypoxia-inducible factor 1, when the tumor is not hypoxic, it's not going to produce new blood vessels. The circulatory tumor cells disappear. Conclusion: sequential combinational therapy with application of epigenetic treatment and targeted therapies in this protocol was safe and extremely effective. We propose this multi-phase combinational approach to be widely studied in a controlled environment. Any questions? Yes?
Thank you very much for the presentation. As we know, the epigenetic has a global influence in our body because it can...
I cannot hear you. Either you have to come or speak on.
We know the epigenetic therapy can change the global expression of some genes in our body. So when we use the epigenetic therapy, maybe some positive cells, some other genes that is like tumor suppressor genes can be...
Yeah, very good question. So let me repeat this so everybody understands. So her question was that when you use epigenetic therapies, and please correct me if I'm not getting it right, but that's what I heard. When you use epigenetic therapies, you change the genomic expression not only on the desirable genes, but also on the genes that you don't want to change. Is that what you said? All right. Very good question. I get this question almost every time we give lectures anywhere. Are you an oncologist?
No, I am a biotechnologist, but in
biotechnologist, yeah. And most of the oncologists are just familiar with the whole concept of using epigenetic therapies for approved indication of the epigenetic drugs. For example, when you're using decitabine, right? The difference between those drugs, azacitidine, decitabine, these drugs with what we do is that, yes, those drugs are not selective. Meaning that when they, let's say, demethylate the DNA, they demethylate all the genes in the DNA. It's a full demethylation of DNA. Versus what we do, and that's what we call the multi-targeted epigenetic therapy, is that it's specific to the genes that you want to demethylate. And it's not just wild demethylation all across them. The other difference is that multi-targeted epigenetic therapies that we have are also effective on histones versus those drugs that are commercially available are only in the DNA. So there's a lot of differences there. The other difference is that when you're using those conventional demethylators, those are also causing mutations in the DNA that can cause cancer. So there are specific genes, so S100B is one of them actually, that becomes mutated and overexpressed by using those genes, those drugs. So imagine that you have a gun that kills all the good guys and the bad guys, because when you unleash the oncopromoter genes, as well as oncosuppressor genes, by demethylating both, then you're shooting yourself at the feet. That's why most of the clinical experience, as far as the data that it's been published using epigenetic drugs, have failed on improving patients' overall survival, because they demethylate also the oncopromoter genes. Our therapy does not do that. It's selective to demethylating the genes that you want to demethylate. Okay, everyone. So,
I will.
For the sake of introduction, for attendees that they just joined us, my name is Dr.Nezami, and I'm the president of the Pacific Medical Center of Hope, and Research Cancer Institutes of America, and Sahel Oncology. We practice integrative oncology in the United States. I have been in practice for about 20 years, and I'm pleased to introduce this novel epigenetic therapy called multi-targeted epigenetic treatment that we have been able to discovered in the last 5-6 years, patented in the United States as well as Europe and many other countries. And here I'll try in this particular lecture, try to address the concept of epigenetic therapies, epigenetics in itself. Many of the slides are intended for clinical application of the protocol, and some are intended for basic science. I do not have any conflicts of interest, although I should admit that I'm an oncology consultant for CARIS laboratory. CARIS is the molecular intelligence laboratory in the United States. There are only a few of these labs around the world that do molecular profiling of the tumor. I also do extensive research with National Cancer Institute, as well as other academia involved in oncology. And we're going to talk about some of the results that we have generated with this sort of collaboration. So this is a very interesting slide. It shows conventional oncology in a glance, practicing conventional medicine in a box, anything that is booked, prescribed, and anything that is approved by pharmaceutical sponsored research is entailed in that box. Outside the box, there are treatments that are mainly based on new concepts and new definitions of cellular biology. Unfortunately, the gap between the research and the gap between the researchers and the clinic and clinicians when it comes to oncology is huge, meaning that when a scientist discovers something in the laboratory, by the time that that knowledge is applied in the clinic, we're talking 25 to 50 years. What we tried to do was to connect what we could discover in the lab to the clinic in the fastest fashion. And therefore, we used the knowledge that is around in the science of epigenetics and tried to use that knowledge and apply it in our patients. So what is epigene? Most of clinicians, I'm sure here, are familiar with the concept of epigene. Historically, it goes back to Apostle, who called superior phenomenon of genes, or epigene, above gene. It was used to be a philosophical terminology because back then they could not explain why the phenotype is presented in different manners and formats by the same sort of genes. If you imagine that the very most applicable example of it are two identical twins that exactly have the same genes, but one gets cancer and the other one doesn't. So how does that happen? When you have identical twins, and I actually have done research on identical twins to see why this happens, but one gets cancer and then the other one doesn't. Obviously there's something going on beyond the genes, otherwise the genes are pretty much actually exactly the same. So if we have coding for this epigene, if we know what exactly is different between these two identical twins, that one is manifested itself by cancer and then the other one doesn't, then obviously we can come up with therapeutic plans to treat those targets that are different and can cause cancer with the same genomics. As I mentioned, the history goes back to days before Waddington, but Waddington is the one that defined it in more specifics in the 1940s. The phenomenon that plays a major role in diversity of biological processes, such as embryogenic or embryonic development, cancer biology, and immune system response, among many others. So when it comes to the stem cells and the variation between the stem cells and cancer stem cells, you'll see epigenetic deviations or aberrancies play the biggest role. When I give lectures about the stem cells, I always give an analogy of a moving target. Because if you think that this is normal stem cell, this is cancer stem cell, the cancer stem cell moves between this cancer phenotype and the normal phenotype as a moving target. The reason that we so far don't have any effective therapy for cancer stem cell is because if you shoot a moving target, the chances that this moving target is very low because the drug has to be adaptive. And this is the dynamic process that normal stem cell and cancer stem cell can behave differently based on their genetic aberrancies dynamically in different times. So two things are very unique about epigenetics. One is that it is hereditary, meaning that, again, going back to its philosophical terminology, if I do something wrong, my kids will be affected. So that means it's hereditary. But it's not in the gene. So I'll give you an example so you see what happens. If you imagine this tie being my genes or the DNA, there are lines in this tie, and those could be oncosuppressor genes, or the genes that suppress the cancer development. And then you have the blue areas that are between these lines, and those could be oncopromoter genes that can cause cancer. There's always a balance between these two. And the balance is not there, you get cancer. But not necessarily you have to have a deletion in the chromosome or some sort of transformation or something that causes genetic abnormality. Rather, just an epigenetic variation can shut down these oncosuppressor genes. So this gene in the DNA becomes transcriptionally silent. Look what happens. This is called a heterochromatin. The DNA does not manifest itself as it should, so you'll see that the chromatin is transcriptionally silent. This phenomenon is hereditary, meaning that the baby can be born with a transcriptionally silent heterochromatin. As the treatment is applied, meaning epigenetic treatment, this can go back to its normal shape. The oncosuppressor genes can manifest themselves. So what I just showed you resembles the fact that epigenetics are reversible, because it can go back to this, and it can go back to this. So it not only is hereditary, but it's also reversible. In the next few slides, you'll see this in a more meaningful way. So, caterpillar and butterfly, they have exactly the same genes, but in different stages of development, their genes are shut down and shut on based on its expression. What I just showed it to you. Their DNA becomes heterochromatin or transcriptionally silent, just like this. If this is caterpillar, the same caterpillar becomes butterfly in different stages of development by transcriptionally active DNA. So, this is a very interesting subject because it's related to what I already went through in the past hour or so about intratumoral hypoxia and so how the hypoxia inside the tumor is manipulated by epigenetics. When a tumor is trying to metastasize, it has to produce vascular endothelial growth factor, and this process is driven by hypoxia. The hypoxia itself is modifiable by epigenetics. As you'll see, the VHL is a very good example of it. It's a gene that is aberrant or mutated in familiar form of renal cell carcinoma, and now we know that in many other types of cancer as a somatic deviation or mutation. So when the VHL is inactivated, it causes accumulation of hypoxia-inducible factor 1 and increased downstream molecules such as EMT transition and angiogenesis. So you'll see that the whole process of angiogenesis is dependent on epigenome. By regulating the epigenetic mechanism, we show improved markers of survival in clinical setting in renal cell carcinoma. Another example of regulation of HIF is through heat shock proteins. So as I would say in the last 5-6 years, our knowledge expanded in the field of epigenetics. We knew that more and more of the genes are targeted by their epigenome, and how you can actually modify these as you do your clinical treatment. There is also the reverse side of the coin that shows how methylation is actually, or epigenetic expression of DNA, can be also manipulated by hypoxia. In other words, when a tumor is hypoxic, how it can change the epigenome of the tumor. Original studies go back to not oncology research, but rather cardiology research, because back in days when we were doing studies on vascular endothelial growth factor, they looked at it as something good, because when you have ischemia in the cardiac muscle, you like to have more angiogenesis around the coronary artery that is obstructed. So you have an occlusion in the coronary artery, and you need blood vessels to create collaterals, so you need vascular endothelial growth factor to be produced. In cancer, it's exactly the opposite. So production of nitric oxide expression is known to be sensitive to epigenetic mechanisms, as methylation increases the NO production. Through this dynamic process, at each point of time, through this dynamic process, the microenvironment crosstalk with the tumor influenced by epigenetic status of the host is controlled by oxygen concentration. So you see, we really don't know if it's the chicken first or the egg first, because either way, hypoxia can change the epigenetic manifestation, and changes in epigenetic can change the hypoxia-driven factors. So it's extremely important for clinicians to understand that when we look at the survival or prognostic markers for survival, we look at something that really translates to that. And epigenetic markers do that. They correlate with the patient's survival. Anything that correlates with hypoxia-inducible factor 1, vascular endothelial growth factor production, not by itself, can correlate with survival. So I have published this several times as far as what we think could be the most effective tool, or what we call companion diagnostic, to translate to the patient's survival. Again, even when I was practicing 10 years ago, I never ordered CT scans, because CT scans never tell you what is the metabolic activity of the tumor, and that's what's the most important or relevant information you can see in imaging that could potentially correlate with patient survival. There are tracers that we also use. It's not commercially available, most of them even in the US, but they trace the hypoxia inside the tumor. So if you have a tracer that you use instead of radiolabeled fructose in your PET scan, that goes after the hypoxia inside the tumor, you're really on the right spot, because that could really show what happens inside the tumor as far as its oxygen saturation and how that could correlate with the survival. There are two other markers. Every patient that comes to see me, we measure their circulatory tumor cells and also plasma vascular endothelial growth factor, because these are markers of leaky vasculature around the tumor, and they both correlate with the patient's survival. The standard of care testings in the US are prostate, breast, and colon cancer circulatory tumor cells, but we use it for all solid tumors. We use a laboratory in Germany that looks at all these circulatory tumor cells. The presence or absence of these circulatory tumor cells, along with their mRNA expression, could certainly correlate with the patient's survival. So, we talked about this. We talked about this. I can't read it. All right, so heterogeneity and hypoxia, one of the most challenging and difficulties in treating patients with cancer is the heterogeneous feature of the tumors. Mostly heterogeneity of the tumor is seen in breast, lung, bladder, melanoma. Really, the more you use treatments conventionally, the more you use chemotherapy, the more you use cytotoxic drugs, you increase the tumor heterogeneity. You increase intratumoral hypoxia. And that is why, from the beginning, when I started this protocol, I was against using cytotoxic therapies all across the board. In fact, if you come to my clinic, any of them, you'll see only probably 10% of my patients that are on cytotoxic drugs. 90% of my patients are not on chemo. And the reason that they're not on chemo is because we know that chemotherapy could only potentially shrink the tumor, especially when you're talking about advanced disease. It does not correlate with the patient's survival in the majority of cases. The reason it doesn't is because it increases the driver load in the tumor, and you all of a sudden, from a tumor that had only one or two drivers, now you're dealing with a tumor that has 10 different mutations. That's also true for targeted therapies. Back in days when we used, for example, erlotinib or Tarceva for a patient with EGFR positive lung cancer, we thought that we were on the spot. We didn't know that by doing that, there would be a second mutation of T790M or other mutations that happens in these sort of settings because you're increasing the heterogeneity of the tumor. Now, with using the circulatory DNA and other liquid biopsy assays, you can see that the heterogeneity of the tumor increases by using any sort of targeted therapy. Any sort of selective pressure that you cause in the tumor causes selective advantage for some colonies of the tumor that are not targeted by your drug. So what our therapy does again is that by targeting the intratumoral hypoxia, it reduces the heterogeneity of the tumor. So again, every patient that comes to see me, they do a circulatory DNA and circulatory tumor cells before treatment, and after the treatment, we see almost 95% at the time that we reduce heterogeneity and we reduce the driver, number of the drivers in the cell. Okay, we talked about this. Chemotherapy increases angiogenesis. That's why most of the trials that have been done, although failing, but they have combined angiogenic blockers with cytotoxic drugs. So when you use Avastin along with carboplatin and Taxol for a patient with non-small cell lung cancer, that's why you're doing it. Because you're thinking that if you combine Avastin and carboplatin, you're blocking angiogenesis along with shrinking the tumor. The reality is that, again, it doesn't happen because you're not blocking the production of VEGF. You're just binding this partially humanized monoclonal antibody VEGF, increasing its production by activating the feedback loops. So conclusion, several conclusions, but the most important one is that we have to change the dynamics of treating patients with cancer. If we don't apply, remember the first slide, that box? If we don't apply science into practice and we just follow what the book says, we're 50 years behind the research. And that's why every 30 seconds somebody dies of cancer. Multi-targeted epigenetic therapy. I told you what companion diagnostics we use. This is the epigenetic therapy that is selective, and it is tuned and tailored to the genomics of the tumor. And we have, as I said, 90 to 95% all across the board inhibition of angiogenesis. 90 to 95% again, because angiogenesis correlates with survival, improve survival. We worked with M.A.Nezami Cancer Center in one of these lectures that I had in San Francisco. I met one of their scientists, and he pulled me out and he said, I have tried to find a drug that does what you just claimed for the last 30 years. And he did not let me eat that day. I barely could go to the restroom because he was so excited. He didn't want me to move from the room. But as I said, as far as I know, there is no treatment globally in any country, any world, you just name it. There is no treatment that targets what we target. And therefore, there is so much excitement. We hired their experimental therapeutic department in MD Anderson. What we did was that we started to collect the tumor from the patient and put the tumor into the mice, and then treat the mice with our treatment. So what we did was that in an ex vivo model, we could get the tumor from the patient, implant it into the mice, use it as an ex vivo model, and treat the mice with our therapy. So next thing that happened was that these mice were cancer-free. And therefore the patients were referred to us and we could treat the patients. And then we co-published these sort of results. So we had the best model that proved the concept of their three-dimensional cell culture model as well as the ex vivo model. This is an example of our therapy's effect on breast cancer cell line exposed to a nitrogen monoxide as an alkylated substance. If you look at the second bar, the second bar is chemo. This bar is the combination of chemo with our treatment. So you see all of a sudden there is almost tenfold. First of all, this is the efficacy of the drug. They call it kinetic unit of apoptosis. So the more it is, the more effective the drug is. So the second bar, this one, the chemo, had less than 4 kinetic units of apoptosis, meaning that it was pretty much completely ineffective. Anything less than 5 is chemo-resistant. When you combine it with our therapy, there was 36, 37. When this is a Canadian lab we used, and I remember that day when they got the results, the director of the lab called me and he said, I've never seen this ever before in using any chemotherapy. And we got so excited about this, we started to culture all cell lines, different types, and we started to look at these magnitudes of synergism as well as magnitude of independent efficacy. This is another slide that looks at what I just told you, the spheroids and how the integrity of these spheroids completely disappears after the therapy. It's too complicated, but just look at the right bar up there at the right upper portion. You see that the third one is the therapy that we used. All of a sudden, these spheroids integrity came down, and then we combined it with cyclophosphamide in this case, and the results continued to be good. As you see, cyclophosphamide by itself increases intratumoral hypoxia. This has been published. Multi-targeted epigenetic therapy and hypoxia, we talked about that, especially when you use a combination of the drugs that we use. The red bars are with one agent, and the pink one, you see there is drastic reduction of the HIF1 activity by our therapy. This is an ovarian cancer cell line that we tested migration and invasion after exposure to different concentrations of our treatment. You can see the blue one up there is without treatment, is a control. Okay, so the blue one is control. As you increase the doses of our therapy, it completely shuts down as it doesn't even migrate. Different dosages. This is an interesting ex vivo model that we did on cholangiocarcinoma. After 5 days of exposure, there was complete necrosis of the tumor. Case review and conclusion. We're going to talk about some human data. Summarizing our data, first of all, we know that our therapy is superior to any and all standard of care. Data, I'm sorry, there is a little bit data that is covered by this purple line. But as of November 2014, we looked over 100 cases that we treated independently, and we found, these are the data that we found. For example, there was 62% of them, they had no actual treatment. They were in hospice situation, stage 4 advanced disease in all sort of types. So out of 37 patients had increased vascular endothelial growth factor, the response was 92%. I told you between 90 to 95%. And as far as circulating tumor cell, there was only one patient that got worse. All of the results. As we speak, we have over 200 patients that we have treated, and we have consistently have seen the same sort of results, over 90 to 95%. These are some samples of the patients. Let me see if I can do something about this purple line up there. Still very small. Okay, so this one was a 29-year-old with history of malignant melanoma. Her father was working at FDA, and I don't know how they found me, but they had gone all over the world, from Australia and Mayo Clinic and everywhere they could find somebody who could do something different for her. She had brain mets, had failed Yervoy, interferon, and subsequent craniotomy. All had failed. When I saw her, she was in a hospice situation. In fact, I remember her father came on the first day and told me, if you think that we should call hospice, just let us know. Because, and she was a medical student. She had quitted there, and she was dying when I saw her. In a matter of just 2 weeks of treatment, as you can see, neuron-specific enolase, which is a marker that we use in melanoma, dropped from 45 down to 9.2. Interleukin 8 dropped to normal range, and her brain lesions started to respond as she had no production of ADH. Her sodium normalized completely. Circulatory tumor cell had complete response. On the second slide, you can see, I'm hoping. Okay, so this is her circulatory tumor cells. This is before treatment. In Germany, they put the date the other way around. So this is April 30th, 2014. This is May 21, 2014. So in less than a month, we were able to completely eradicate circulatory tumor cells. Circulatory tumor cells were positive for telomerase before treatment. After the treatment, negative. As you can see, there are no indications of presence of circulatory tumor cells. Case 2 is a 67-year-old with renal cell carcinoma. After 2 weeks of treatment, there was substantial response. His serum VEGF dropped from 248 down to 58. Interleukin 8, which is a marker of angiogenesis, dropped from 448 down to 16. And go on and on. It's just miraculous. Again, circulatory tumor cells were positive for G250, negative after treatment. G250 is an aggressive marker for renal cell carcinoma. In fact, there are some trials to find a monoclonal antibody for G250. None of them have been commercially available, extremely toxic. So this is our first proof of concept for blocking G250 by therapy for renal cell carcinoma. Okay, this one is a 64-year-old with pancreatic cancer, and you can see that after 2 weeks of treatment, CA19-9 dropped from 110 to 80, CA dropped, and we continued the treatment. This time, actually, we were able to de-stage her. In other words, he had inoperable pancreatic cancer, and that became operable. And I use a surgeon that we don't do VPOL anymore. I mean, I don't do. There are many others. Everybody else does that, but on a localized pancreatic cancer, I don't do VPOL anymore. So we do nanoknife, which is a laser technology that we do intraoperably. That we did that, and he went to complete remission from inoperable pancreatic cancer. This is telomerase positive, CK20 positive. Same patient, circulating tumor cells after 2 weeks of a couple of weeks of treatment, no indication of presence of circulating tumor cells. 54-year-old invasive lobular breast cancer, had failed hormonal blockade. Her husband was a very famous businessman globally, sister company of Airbus. So they brought her from Cleveland to my clinic, and I treated her a matter of just a few weeks. You'll see the slides. We did not use, obviously, any chemotherapy. And the scan showed extremely effective results. Metabolic activity of lesions, hilar, pericardinal, perivascular lymph nodes dropped from 13 down to 6, and later down to 2.8. So this is what I'm talking about. Metabolic activity, or assuming metabolic activity in scan, in PET scan. We don't do CT scan again. CT scan does not show what's going on. So PET scan showed all this activity. After a few weeks and 3 months of treatment, dropped almost to normal. 2 was background. Hers was 2.8. And she started with 13.8. Extremely active lymph nodes. And she had it on all other distant organs. So look at this. These are what I'm talking about, hilar and mediastinal lymph nodes. And as you can see, it's completely shut down after the treatment. It's pretty much normal scan. Again, look at this intersection, look at that. Look at these huge lymph nodes. They are huge. And after the treatment, completely dead. We have the CT too, but you can see CT doesn't show anything. It just shows that there are some lymph nodes. Case 5, 70-year-olds, right infiltrating breast cancer again. She had failed Gemzar, cytoxin, carboplatinum, you name it. She had tried several lines of chemotherapy, all failed. Very quickly, her tumor markers dropped after we started the treatment. We started her on 4 times per week treatment after 3 sessions, the pain and discomfort. She had extreme pain because the pleural effusion, the malignant pleural effusion was so much that we had to drain 2.7 liters of malignant fluid every week from this patient. After a few weeks of treatment, this dropped. So instead of 2.7 liters, this time it was 2 liters. A few weeks later, it was 1.5 liters. A few weeks later, it was nothing. She went to complete pathological response or remission. So let's look at the PET scan. These are the markers. As you can see, when Jeff dropped so quickly, she went back to Dallas, couldn't do the treatment, went up, again back down. Circulating tumor cell 0, went back up again when she left to Dallas. These are the scans. Look at this. It's occupying the entire 4 quadrants of the breast. As you can see, it is actually invading the rib cage. Look at this. And you can see this part, all this part, is pleural effusion. The lung is completely collapsed. She was on oxygen all the time. And look at post-treatment, nothing. And look at the tumor, dead. Again, you can see breast cancer, nothing. Another one, Dr. Carcinoma, she was HER2 positive. The standard of care is what? Herceptin, and then chemotherapy, mastectomy, and then bye. Wait and see. That approach is just funny. When you have a patient, you treat with chemotherapy, they go to remission, and then you tell them, we're going to wait until it comes back. Really? So obviously it came back. After 6 months, she started to have seizure, and she was found to have 5 enhancing lesions in her brain. Oh, well, it came back. Now you have a stage 4 disease. It's, you have 6 months to live. Sorry. Is that how you practice medicine? Anyways, so she came to see me. Obviously, everything had failed already, just like every other patient I see. And we started her on the treatment. The markers just drop. I remember first day when I saw her, it was the day before Christmas. And she was on a wheelchair. And she was only 40-something years old, very young, actually 34, I guess. Yeah, 34, 37 years old. So when I was planning to leave the country next day, and I canceled my trip, stayed in the clinic, because I knew that if I leave, she's gonna die. And I gave her treatments every day, because I was hoping that she would respond. I really didn't know if she would. I thought it's too late for her because she was so advanced. She was like on 300 microgram of fentanyl patch. She was barely moving. And I really thought that she would die either way, but I will try. And that's what I did. And she responded. Just in a matter of a few weeks, everything came down. She started to walk, no fentanyl patch, no pain medication. She became a normal person. PET scan, restaged again. Oops. Okay. PET scan, restaged again. Partial response shrinkage of tumor of all metastatic sites. Significant improvement on the level of activity of all lesions. You can see bone lesions, periaortic lymph nodes. Look at the markers. Just dropped. One thing was very interesting. When they do circulatory tumor cell analysis in US, they use verdicts by Quest. This lab is only one that is approved for breast cancer. They measure the number of the cells. They can't characterize them. They can't do protein expressions or genomic alteration analysis. What they do is that they just measure the number of the cells. And the cutoff is 5. In other words, if you have more than 5 cancer cells in 7.5 cc's of blood, you're going to die in less than 4 months. That's the cutoff. Guess what? She had 1,000 cells in 7.5 cc's of blood. So if the 5 is the cutoff, she had 1,000. So she was walking on a minefield. And when I called the lab, I said, 1,000, have you ever seen this? And they said, well, it was more than 1,000. But our technology cannot measure if it's more than 1,000. But she had more than 1,000. Look at the numbers. Came down to 735, 56, no treatment. No treatment does that. Okay, 63-year-old history of stage 4 colon cancer. I can just go on and on. I don't know how much time we have, but again, positive CK20 telomerase before treatment, after the treatment, everything negative. This happens 95% of the time. Non-small cell lung cancer. She was on Tarceva. She had failed chemotherapy. Circulating tumor cells were positive for C-mice and HDAC. HDAC is histone deacetylase enzyme. It's an epigenetic marker that we look at in circulating tumor cells. In fact, I was the one who actually brought the technology on the circulating tumor cells to measure HDAC on circulating tumor cells. So when you have a circulating tumor cell that is positive for epigenetic deviation, you know that epigenetic drugs work. C-mice is a marker that correlates with cancer stem cell bivalency. There's a team of epigenetic scientists that I used to work with, by Stephen Bailey at Johns Hopkins and other scientists at Peter Jones at USC, and they did studies on bivalency. So if you look at Stephen Bailey's publication in 2014, it describes what cancer stem cell bivalency means. It means that these cancer stem cells that are confused, they don't know if they should behave normal or they should be cancerous. Their behavior depends on two markers, E-cadherin and C-mice. And C-mice, when it's positive on circulating tumor cells, first of all, there's no drug for it. It's a transcriptional target, there's no drug for it. And second, is one of those targets that I love, because when I see it, I know that epidermal mesenchymal transition is active and our treatment works. Sure enough, post-treatment negative. These patients are alive. These people, we didn't just treat them and then they died after that 2 months later under my care. Any patient under my care who continues the treatment, they will stay alive. This was a case of, I think it's over 3-4 years now that she came with stage 4 lung cancer. Pancreatic cancer again, positive CK20 telomerase, negative. Prostate cancer. This was an interesting case. I treated him, he had a stage 4 prostate cancer. When I saw him 7 years ago, by the way, he's still alive, by the way, he's cancer-free. When I saw him 7 years ago, and he had 2 months to live, he had bone mets all over to the sacral bone, bladder metastasis, pelvic involvement. He could not walk. He could not walk. And just in a matter of 3 days, he started to walk. He never received chemotherapy or radiation, never removed his prostate. So goes on and on. Again, positive SEMA. Okay, negative. I always say to the biologists when they try to understand what I say, I tell them, don't think, because they make themselves confused. I went to National Cancer Institute, the head of the NCI was sitting there, and I was giving the lecture, his eyes were open like this. And I thought, is he getting it? Is he understanding what I'm saying? And then finally he said, Dr.Nezami, could you please go slower, because I can't follow you. So what I always say is that when Jesus started to walk on the water, he did not explain how he did it. He did it, and people believed in that. So I can go on and on and on and on and talk about all these mechanistics and epigenome and all that, but I call it a mental masturbation. I'd rather stay away from it. Okay. When I say see it to believe it, because there's a lot of guys out there that they say, oh, I got a treatment for cancer, I got a treatment for cancer, I got a treatment for cancer. And then when they approach me, this is what I say. I see it, and then I believe it. I don't want to know anything beyond that. Look at this, the stage 4 melanoma. You see it, stage 4 melanoma. 5 days of treatment. You believe it. It works. Conclusion, I let you conclude. Any questions?